I've had people say that that's one of the largest values of the podcast as a format is a listener is able to engage a part of themselves with that playing, even if they're not paying attention to all of it, um, while they're doing something else. I can imagine a person who's at work, um, who's radio was a thing for a long time, and it still is. But if a person's able to just have their own private thing and choose a podcast, and I expect an audiobook would be a little bit the same, but I think that the unpred I mean, if I'd want to pay attention if it's a book, but if it's a podcast and it's light enough that I don't consider it study, I don't mind if I zone out for a little bit. I think I personally would go a little bit nuts, but I think for most people, zoning out during a podcast is not stressful at all. Yeah. You don't have to be completionist about listening to everything, about paying attention and taking notes for everything. Occasionally, something will kind of like pop into your attention. It's interesting, and then you fade off doing other more important things. And for a book, you got to be present. You got to be paying attention. Got to be painting the pictures in your head while you're listening. And you couldn't do that while driving a truck. Maybe there's some people who can. Um, Maybe you shouldn't, but somebody at work certainly probably wouldn't do that. I know enough about myself that I'd probably be driven nuts unless I was near something so I could look up every reference. If I'm interested in somebody saying something, I'm going to go look it up. Like I'll pause it right then and there and be like, "Oh man, I want to learn about X. I want to learn about analytics for podcasting."
Couldn't you just like
I just,
wait? Couldn't you just write it down and then search up afterwards? Or you just have to. You'd have to
no,
find out right away.
I would love while it's in my head, I would love to pause
Uh,
because you can pause. You can't pause real life, but you can pause the podcast, take your pause craft and go off do do some research and then come back and now you've got a little bit of expertise in your well I guess I'm talking about me. So then I would come back with some of that expertise in my head, and now I have even more to come to the table, even more to bring to the table, so that when I restart, when I resume the podcast, I have more and a more educated version of myself to pay attention to the next nuances with that recent expertise in mind. So the next things that they're talking about, I'm I'm more present for. And it just keeps going and going and going. I'll just pause again if they're talking about something else that I don't know enough about, some reference, some whatever, and I'll come back. And so the experience of me listening to a podcast would be ridiculous. It'd be like, oh, this is a 2-hour podcast. 4 hours later, I'm still not done.